occasional and new exporters? We are just gonna close it now, but thank you for answering. Yeah.
You will have the results, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, the majority of you are experienced exporters, but we do have about 34%, which are either new or occasional exporters. Thank you for that. So if I can just proceed. So the presentation today will cover some of the basics. So it will be useful for those that are occasional and new exporters, but also now that we are out of the EU, for those experienced exporters that probably were just primarily dealing with the EU, the presentation hopefully will be of use to you. So what is an export is when you sell goods or services from the UK to any country in the world. And as I just mentioned, from the 1st of January, anything that you were doing with the EU is now also considered an export. And the way we're trading with the world is now under two frameworks, primarily under the new UK border control and the Northern Ireland Protocol. Now, I'm not gonna go into the details of those two because this will be covered in our next Bitesize session in 2 weeks' time. So I will suggest that you also register on that one if you're interested to understand more about what these new frameworks look like. So straight up into the 4 steps export process. Today, I'm not gonna discuss so much about the strategy and developing your export plan. That's something that you can work with your international trade advisor. We do work with the Department for International Trade, and they can help you to develop that strategy and also how to reach new markets. The chamber is also well placed to help you with that, but today's session is more on the technicalities of making the export happen. So whether you're new to export, occasional exporters primarily, one of the first things that you're gonna need to do is a bit of a checklist. And you will see a number of things that you need to consider when you receive an order, is whether you have a EORI number, commodity code, the rules of origin, documentation, pricing, insurance, and so forth. So I'm gonna go and speak more in depth about each of these in the next slides. So the first one is the EORI number. You gotta have an economic operator registration number. It's basically your exporter registration. Is the number that enables you to do the customs processes, is how the HMRC identifies you as an exporter. For those who are VAT registered, HMRC will have issued automatically you with one. If you are non-VAT registered, you need to apply for one. If by any chance you are unsure whether you have or not one, then you need to check with the HMRC EORI team about what's happening with your number and if you have the right one in place. If you were only trading with the EU before and you had a EU EORI number, please know that you will need now a GB EORI number. So it's starting with GB. And if you're moving goods to or from Northern Ireland, you may also need a EORI number starting with XI. And there are a few links there where you can find out more information about that. And depending on the Incoterms that you use, you may also need a EU EORI number. And that's the number that will enable you to do any customs clearance in any EU state. The other thing that exporters need to be very fully aware of, make sure that they are using the right one, is the commodity codes. The commodity codes are also known as the HS or tariff codes, and is the product-specific number code that allows customs authorities across the world to identify the goods that are being exported or imported. Is the commodity codes are essential because it will tell you whether those goods will be under any preferential access. So it will dictate any duties or taxes or reliefs or sanctions that are applied to those. The first 6 digits are standard across the world, and then there will be each country will have their the rest of the numbers will be more specific to each country. So for export, normally we're talking about 8 digits, and for imports, about 10 digits. The trader is legally responsible to ensure that you're using the correct code. And in this case, we have been urging a lot of the companies that we are supporting to ensure that they are using the right one, checking with the trade tariff tool if the commodity code is still suitable for what they're doing. We have so many cases where they just take in the word of their importer about what, or the buyer or their partner overseas, that that's the commodity code. So just make sure, because ultimately you are the responsible for and liable to HMRC if there is any, if you're using the incorrect one. If you are in doubt, if you're having a hard time classifying your goods using the trade tariff tool, then you can use HMRC, either the informal or the legally binding service, to help you classify your goods correctly. That's the trade tariff tool. It's very easy to use, and it has different sections where you can actually find the most suitable code to your goods. Then the other thing that most exporters need to consider is what other export requirements I need to bear in mind when exporting. And they launch a new UK export checker tool where you can check whether there is any trade agreements in place or whether we are trading on WTO terms, what duties or other taxes apply, the documentation, any special licenses, sanctions, product specific requirements, and packaging requirements, just to mention but a few. So I mentioned the rules of origin, the trade agreements. So we are either trading under a trade agreement or not. It's very simple. We have a number of, obviously the UK has been signing a number of trade agreements with a lot of countries, including the EU as a bloc. And the tool itself will help you to understand what specific rules of origin apply to your commodity code when exporting to a specific country. It will tell you if it's subject to a tariff or not. And we'll see that if you're exporting to the EU, there will be a whole set of rules just applicable to the trade between the UK and the EU. Here is an example of if I was to be exporting something from the UK to Germany. It tells you, for example, here that there is obviously a trade agreement. It tells you exactly the duties. And obviously I didn't put everything that you get when using the tool, but you have here two additional things that you can check is what do you need to consider to get your goods out of the UK, and what you need to consider to get the goods into the importing market. So in this case, into Germany. In terms of documentation, obviously there is the standard documentation such as the commercial invoice. We have a lot of companies that maybe if you're new to export, occasional exporter, there are a few things that you need to add to the commercial invoice, such as the Incoterm, you know, whether or not you have to charge for VAT on the export. So those are things that you need to be very clear about. Obviously have a packaging list. You will have to do a customs declaration. If you're doing transit, then you will need an additional transit document. If you are accessing a market where we have a trade agreement and you have and you want to access that preferential access, then you may need either a self-certification, depending on the trade, what the trade agreement stipulates, or a special certificate of origin like the UK EORI. Worth noting that from the 1st of January, ATRs, which were exclusive certificates for preferential access with Turkey, no longer apply to the UK companies. You need to check what outlines under the trade agreement with Turkey, what constitutes proof of origin when exporting to Turkey. I think it's a self-certification. In terms of not preferential documents, We used to issue European certificates of origin, but from the 1st of January, these have now been replaced for UK certificates of origin. And you can also tap into the Arab certificate of origin, which have not had any change from the 1st of January. These non-preferential documents, whilst they might not give you preferential duties or anything like that, they will help you to get access into the market. Importing customs authorities use the non-preferential documents just to check about what is coming and what quotas might be in place, or if there is any sanctions. It helps those importing authorities to see and protect their local industry as well. There are other documentation that you might need, such as for temporary exports, such as the ATA carnets. These were things that most companies were using when doing overseas exhibitions, and they were taking, equipment and things like that. But from the 1st of January, the ATA carnets can now also be used when doing temporary exports to the EU. We had a lot of cases where companies are, for example, taking some tools or equipment to deliver a service overseas or in the EU, and finding that obviously the use of AT carnets will enable them to move those equipment back and forth as smooth as possible. Another area that you will have to consider is having a special license certificate permit, or what sanctions might be in place. So products of animal, plants, or food or agriculture products will be subject to things such as an export health certificate or a phytosanitary certificate. Anything related to chemical and waste will be subject to their own specific certificates. Control all dual-use goods will also be required to have an export license. Diamonds. If you are using, for example, a special customs procedure, or you're thinking about using a special customs procedure, such as inward processing or outward processing and so forth, please know that you must become authorized before you do any shipment. And obviously, these authorization numbers will be required and will be used during the customs processes, especially your customs declarations. And the other thing that you need to consider is whether there are any sanctions or restrictions to the countries where you're exporting. So I'll give you the example about Iraq or Iran or some of the Middle East countries which have been in the list of sanctions. So worth having that in mind, because ultimately, if there is a sanction, even if you have an order in place, you might not be able to actually do the export. So very important to bear that in mind. Then another area that needs consideration is the product-specific requirements. We know that and this is more specifically to the UK and the European trade agreement, whilst both parties have made what they can and commitment to meet international standards, there has been some deviation from the 1st of January, and that has affected, for example, conformity assessment certificates. So, for example, we've seen changes on the CE marking. If you had a EU CE marking, please know that now we will have our own in the UK. And if you had registered a marking here in the UK, you might notice that you cannot just use it in Europe anymore. You have to have and register for a European CE marking. And there will be some additional requirements to bear in mind in order for you to place manufactured goods in Europe. But this also applies to other countries, so it's not just exclusive to Europe. And with some countries, we do have some agreements about conformity assessments. Labeling, that's another very important thing. And you do need to check what are the regulations in the importing country where you're sending the goods. Talk to your customer, make sure that between you and your customer, you are understanding what needs to be adapted in your product. So it could be the label, the way you are labeling, And we'll see that with the EU, we'll see some changes in that respect for some of the products that we export. Also marketing standards, and if you're exporting fresh fruit, vegetable, eggs, or others, you will need to, again, check the importing requirements in the country where you're exporting. This is not just exclusive to considering if you're exporting to Europe. Check the local regulations and make sure that you are making the adaptations and making the changes prior to shipping. Another thing to consider, and I think some of the traders have kind of, this has fall under the cracks in terms of the checking, is the packaging requirements. So from the 1st of January, any movement of goods between Great Britain and the rest of the world, and including the EU, it must meet the Wood Packaging International standards. And this means that anything that you're sending that is using wood packaging materials, such as crates, boxes, packing boxes made of wood, will need to be ISPM 15 certified. So they have to have a proper heat treatment to enable you to move the goods. Something as simple as not having that certification could get your goods stuck in customs if you're not meeting those requirements. Another very important thing, and this is an area where we see a lot of confusion, especially now that we are out of the EU between some UK and their European partners, is the Incoterms. The Incoterms are the international commercial terms that help understand who's responsible for what in the export and import process. So who's responsible for the transport, the packaging, the customs, the insurance, and so forth. The international commercial terms are issued by the International Chambers of Commerce, and these are revised every 10 years. The latest version came into effect in January 2020. It has 11 terms, and you can use either the version from 2020 or the version from 2010, but you gotta be very specific on your invoice which version you're using and what term you're using. We always, as a chamber, we tend to suggest traders and exporters to stay away from using ex-works and DAP, and I'll just explain to you why. You can see here we have a high-level infographic on the international in the Incoterms of the 2020 version. You see the ex-work is kind of the Incoterm that requires the less risk for the exporter. Is the easiest one because you can simply say to your to your buyer, well, the goods are here ready in my premises, you come and pick them up. And you have no responsibility to do customs clearance, and here in the UK, no responsibility for arranging transport or insurance and anything. So in that sense, it's good, but in other, but the risk of using ex-work comes in two main areas. One is because you're not legally responsible for doing the customs clearance here in the UK, and you are not legally entitled to get the customs declaration, which is one of the main proof of exports. If you are a 0 rating for VAT, that export invoice, then you need to have proof of export. And that's where ex-work, when you're selling on ex-works, you might find yourself in a bit of a pickle because then you might be you're at hands of your buyer, whether they want or not to share that information with you. The other thing is, if they are doing the customs clearance, are they doing it with their own GB EORI number, or are they using yours? If there is any mistakes on that customs declaration, you, the exporter, if they are using your GB EORI number, you will be the one that is liable to HMRC. So make sure that you understand. And if you are using ex-works, just make sure that you understand what is your buyer doing, how they're doing it, and if there is any way that it will affect you. And then the other one is DDP, which is on the other side of the spectrum in terms of risk. When you're selling on DDP, the exporter, the UK exporter, is actually is responsible for the whole export and import process. So the export clearance here in the UK, for arranging insurance, transport, all the logistics, and also doing the import clearance at the country where you are importing, and paying any duties or taxes that may be applicable. Now, for that, you might find that you need to have some sort of registration in that market, in that country, to enable you to do the customs clearance. In the case of our trade with Europe, for instance, from the 1st of January, if you are selling DDP to European EU partners, you will be required to have a EU EORI number on top of your GB1 and register for VAT in one of the EU states. And in some cases, you might find that you might need a fiscal representative in some of the EU states. Then the next thing is the payment terms. This is something that we thoroughly urge companies to do, is do your due diligence. It's great to have an order, but you also have to make sure that you are doing the due diligence and are operating with a partner that is trustworthy, so you can avoid delays in your payments or credit risk. Also determine what method of payment you're gonna use. I know most exporters will go for the advanced payment option before they ship, which is probably very reasonable when you're doing business for the first time. However, as a long-term strategy, you might want to consider other options for payments, such as the letters of credit, documentary collection, open account, and so forth. Each of those will have their pros and cons. So just make sure that you understand, and you also understand the cost of using any of those methods of payment. And then finally, how you're doing your pricing and invoicing. So depending on the Incoterm, you'll know what exactly you are responsible for in terms of the cost. Are you responsible for the transport, insurance, clearance? You also have to consider other things for your pricing. Are you invoicing in another currency? How are you managing the rest on that? Are you able to zero rate your export invoice? What is the cost of the documentation? What is a one-off cost, and what is an ongoing cost for every shipment that you do? So, for example, applying for an export license might be a one-off cost every year, whilst doing a preferential document might be a cost that you have to bear in mind in every single shipment. And also, what costs are associated with the method of payment that you choose. So if you're using letters of credit, there is a cost attached to do that. So worth understanding what those are. And lastly, so your goods are ready to leave, and depending on the Incoterm, you're looking about the export and customs clearance, the transport and insurance, and the import clearance. So another poll for you, so if your ladies can just help me to put it on, is now that we are out of the EU, we know that customs declarations are going to go from 50 million to about 300 million. What have been your thoughts about how you're going to deal with those? Are you going to use it? Are you going to do it yourself? Are you using an existing customs agent or freight forwarder? Are you looking to appoint a new one? You still don't know. What is it? So if you can help us understand where you are in this, will be very helpful. Right, so a few more, but basically most of you are using your existing customs agent. Some are looking to appoint a new one, and some are still undecided. So that's all good. It's very important that you understand what is the capacity. If you're using your existing freight agent, is to understand their capacity, and depending on the Incoterm that you're using, whether they can support you both in the UK and the market where you are exporting. If you're gonna do it yourself, you can actually. You can do it using Chief, but you have to register in the National Export System. but you can actually also buy a specialized custom software that will be linked to Chief, and alternatively, as we just said, use a customs intermediary. We as Chamber are a customs agent, and we've been preparing for launching this service for the last 3 years. We have a team of about 9 people trained and ready to help you with export and import customs declarations. Here comes another bit. So for customs declarations, you will need a number of information. You need to provide this information to your customs agent. So that includes the commodity cost, which I mentioned before, the weight, the value, any licenses or documentation that you need to attach to that, special permits or authorizations. I mentioned the special customs procedures, obviously the exporter and importer details, and the transport details. And I already gave you an explanation about the use of X-Work, so I won't repeat myself. Lastly, then you go ahead and the next bit is, depending on the Incoterm, who's doing the arrangement for the transport and the pickup. Talk to your freight forwarder to understand if they also understand the new rules, especially with the trade with the EU. For example, if you're using the AP, the exporter is responsible to transport the goods until they are delivered at place at a great destination. With FOB, the exporter is responsible for the transport of the goods and before they are loaded up into the ship. So just make sure that you understand your responsibilities with each Incoterm and the costs associated to that. You also need to arrange insurance, that just to protect what happens to the goods while they are being transported. And if you need some help, I mean, most of the freight forwarders will offer you some sort of service around that. But if you also need some support, we also have partnered with AB Insurance, and they provide some very cost-effective cargo insurance. Lastly, when the goods arrive to the country of destination, then you're looking into the import customs declaration and the, paying any duty and VAT. This will depend on who's responsible and what the Incoterm is have been used. Only if you have been you sold goods on DDP, you will be responsible as an exporter. Also, will be responsible for the import customs clearance. Otherwise, the import customs clearance is normally responsibility of your buyer. And there are things here to be considered is how you're going to pay for the duty and VAT, if any applicable. Are you using any special VAT schemes, such as the postponed VAT or the ferment account, and so forth. And post-export is just making sure that you retain evidence of the export. If you're exporting under a preferential access, then make sure that you have the proof of origin in place. And for those that do not meet the Intrastat reporting exemption thresholds, then for 2021 you will have to continue to do those reporting. For more information, we have links right there. So lastly, from the 1st of January, we wanted to know how you have found the movement of goods since we are now out of the EU. If you're ladies, you can launch the poll. Thank you. How do you find it very easy, moderately easy, moderately difficult, very difficult, or it's too early to say? In the last few surveys that we have done in January and in March, exporters have expressed that they have been the ones that finding it most difficult to deal with the new rules. And I can see from our early responses that this is still the case for most of you. So more than 50% are finding it either moderately difficult or very difficult. So thank you for replying to that. Yeah, so how can we help you? We have a number of services and resources. We have a Brexit hub, which we are keeping up to date with all the latest news. We have also put together a series of EU transition support packages, which are aligned with the new HMRC grant of £2,000. We have a bespoke service, which is an hourly service where you can either access our in-house team or our customs experts on hourly basis for more punctual and more in-depth support. We are the largest providers of export documentation here in the Northwest, so we can help you with EORI, safety carnets, legalization and apostille services. You need VAT advice. We have partnered with VATIT to help companies understanding the new VAT rules, especially now that we can no longer benefit from the EU triangulation. And you have debt issues. We also have a strategic partners that can help. And as I mentioned before, we offer customs agent services. So I'm not gonna go into more detail about our services. All the links are there if you want to understand more, and our email address. And lastly, I just wanted to draw your attention to what we have coming up in the next couple of months. We are having a series of training courses, bite-sized sessions, and market events. And next week we'll have the first one with Her Majesty Trade Commissioner for the LATAC region. On the 21st of April, we have a free networking event with our partners in Bulgaria, and there will be another number of UK chambers joining on that one. On the 28th of April, we have an event with the US about how to make it in that market. And on the 19th of May, we'll be having trade and investment opportunities in Pakistan, where we'll have the British embassy participating on that, and a couple of case studies showcasing how they made it a successful project in Pakistan. So the other training courses are covering a wide range of areas where we know companies are in need of support, ranging from rules of origin, Incoterms, tariffs, special customs procedures, and so forth. So please do visit our website if you want to keep up to date with everything that we are doing. And lastly, if I can ask you to help us to improve for future events, our last poll of the presentation, and then we can dive into the Q&A. Julius, thank you. Just okay, thank you very much. We appreciate, and if you have any other further feedback that can help us improve, then just email us to expertbritain@gmchamber.uk. Thank you very much. Right, so now I guess we're just on the Q&A. I'm gonna stop sharing my slides so we can just jump into the questions.
Yes, if someone has further questions, you can add them to the chat or to the Q&A box at the bottom. Yeah. At the moment, we have one question, which is, what is needed to export to Switzerland?
Well, it will be hard for me to tell you right here, right now, but as I said, you can use the UK government tool with your commodity code and use it to understand what specifically you need to consider for Switzerland. But it will be, I would say, it will be fairly similar to what you will need to do for the EU. So apart from the standard documentation, depending on the goods that you're exporting, then obviously there might be some additional requirements. And without knowing the commodity code and other things, it's very hard to kind of give you a more specific. But if you want to drop us an email with the commodity code of what you intend to export to Switzerland, then we can help you further. I know people are asking about the slides. Yes, the slides will be shared after the event.
We've got another question. What are the biggest import and export problems that exist right now in the trade with the EU that your members report? So what have you heard that are the biggest problems?
So it's a number of things. We know that rules of origin are one of the key areas that have caused a lot of confusion and a lot of also shock, I guess, because everything has been sold like it's free trade and so free duties and all that. But we know that under the new trade agreement, we only have bilateral accumulation. So not necessarily everything that we export back and forth will be duty free. That's one. The other one that I mentioned before is the use of Incoterms. I think some of the European counterparts have not prepared as good as they could have done. And then when shipments have gone to Europe, to the EU, and they get stuck in customs, the importer has been finding out that they needed to appoint just a customs agent to do the imports. So the exporter in the UK has been doing a lot of, very worried because some of the goods have been stuck in customs, but it's been basically because the EU counterparts have not prepared and not done their homework either in terms of what is needed to import those and not understanding their responsibilities on the Incoterms. The faster parcel operators, we've been getting a lot of those queries, and there are a number of reasons. Recently, we just found one of our members got stuck their goods with, I think it was either TNT or one, and it was basically because one of the pieces of the goods that they were sending was missing. So they just didn't release the goods, not even for going into the customs process. In other cases, it has been about their ability to do next day delivery. So they have kind of enabled that service for some of the UK companies. Paperwork. We know that some of the fast parcel operators have automatically charged UK exporters for import duties or VAT, even though they have provided with proof of origin. So there has been a lot of back and forth on those with the fast parcel operators. But yeah, we know that there is issues with those.
Yes, on the Q&A, we have a similar question as well. During 2021, we have found long transit delays between us and the US. The reason is always customs. Why do you think this is?
I think it's basically, we find the documentation is one, not having the right documentation, or as I said, not understanding who's responsible for what in the export and import process because of the Incoterms. So we're having goods are being stuck in customs because the importer didn't realize that they were responsible for doing the import customs clearance, or that they obviously not only the import customs clearance, but also needed to pay for the import duty or the VAT if any applicable. So I think we're finding that, and there is a bit of confusion because obviously with the EU, even though things with the rest of the world pretty much remain the same in general in terms of rules, there has been some confusion on what affects the trade with the rest of the world.
We've got another question is, what is the most important change in the export process with Brexit?
I think one of the most important ones is the fact that now UK exporters are required to do customs declarations. That was not something that anybody, both EU or UK companies, needed to do prior to Brexit. And I think that's one of the biggest. The second one is the fact that now that we are considered a third country, we are now subject to the same regulations and any other third country to the EU. So any special licenses, certificates for a specific, sectors like food or animal, origin goods, export licenses. Those are things that we didn't have to do before prior to Brexit. And the same goes for the product specific regulations. And needless to say, the rules of origin, nothing is gonna compare to what we had prior to Brexit. We don't have full diagonal accumulation. We have bilateral accumulation, and that is going to have some impact in some UK companies being able to continue to be distribution hubs as they were prior to Brexit.
Mhm. And finally, going back to the previous questions, we have a follow-up which says, what can UK exporters do to help speed imports into the EU? Many are doing everything they can on our side to get it right. What more can we do?
I think it's just communication with your partners. I think some of the issues that we have seen members facing since January is because maybe there was not a conversation with their partners about what the responsibilities and clarifying who was doing what post-Brexit and the export and import journey. So as I said, just having us their buyer. Do you have a customs agent in place? Do you know that you're under this Incoterm I'm selling to you? You are responsible for that. Ensuring that you're working with your partner to understand what is it that you need to comply with in terms of the products. Any special certifications, don't leave it. We had a lot of issues where the company already shipped the products, and obviously in customs they are now asking them, did you have the the export license or the certificate and so forth. So that's worth having an honest conversation with your buyers and try to work with your freight and logistic operator, customs agent, to help you as much as possible in the process and understand the new rules also on transport and transit.
All right, I think those were all the questions.
Right. Well, thank you very much, everybody who tuned in today. It was a pleasure. And as I said, everything will be shared with you after the event. And make sure that you tune in or register for our upcoming Bitesize sessions or training. And if you need any further support, the team here at Greater Manchester Chamber is ready to help. Thank you very much and have a good day.
Thank you.